goes without saying that these days we pretty much do everything online, right? You shop, you bank, you spend endless hours on quote-unquote research. It's a digitized, globalized world, and that means that cyberspace's evil twin, cybercrime, is here to stay. Close to 20,000 Canadians fall victim to cybercrime every day. Identity theft, credit card cloning, phantom ATM withdrawals, all part of a global cybercrime network that's managed to stay one step ahead of the law. But according to Misha Glenny, a former reporter with the BBC, these crimes are a minor nuisance compared to the new breed of cybercriminal, one that the police, government, and military are not yet equipped to deal with. The super sophisticated hacker. Yes, sure, some of them use their power for good. I saw the girl with the dragon tattoo as well, but others want to threaten infrastructures like power grids and water supplies. Misha tracked down some of the world's most notorious hackers to find out what drives them and also what we can do to protect ourselves. It's all in a new book called Dark Market. Misha Glenny, everybody.
Hello, good to see you again, man. Nice to see you.
Welcome back.
Thanks.
You know, last time you were here, we were alluding to the fact, you were teasing the fact that this was the next step for you.
Yes.
Getting into the world of cyber thieves.
Absolutely. We anticipated it then. You're absolutely right. I've forgotten that. And off I went.
I mean, compare global organized crime to this sort of global cyber crime and what the similarities and some of the differences.
Well, I think the main difference is that the people who perpetrate cybercrime are of a different mindset. They are lone wolves. They go out there searching the web themselves, working out what they can do, how they can hack, how they can engage with other criminals without compromising themselves in any way. More recently, we've seen traditional organized crime groups come in and try and get a piece of the action.
Did they, a lot of these guys do it for Russian ego, and some, like you said, do it for political purposes. Have you ever seen that world of hacking and cyber crime be used for good?
Yes. Look, I mean, I think that hackers are potentially fantastic people, and all hackers have to learn by exploring at the very edges of what is legal and illegal. I mean, if you take the best case is the Millennium Trilogy, the girl with the dragon tattoo, she uses hacking for good purposes. I also think that in principle, groups like Anonymous and LulzSec, these are the ones who defended Assange by attacking PayPal, attacking MasterCard, and so on and so forth. They're not doing it for money. They're not doing it for financial gain. They're doing it because they feel that as the younger generation, their voice is not being heard. Now, by the criminal justice system, the Anonymouses and the LulzSecs of this world are regarded as criminal hackers. But I think we have to learn what are the motivations of people? Why are they doing it? It's not the same if they're a criminal hacker and if they're if they're motivated by political idealism, or if they're motivated by freedom of information and things like that. So I think we have to invest more in understanding the people who are demonstrating these abilities.
You know, it's funny, you hear so much about, certainly from the conservative governments, and this is not a bad thing, but you hear this tough on crime, tough on crime. Then you see these copyright bills, which are completely disconnected from that, but the copyright bills attacking pirates, people who are illegally downloading music or movies or TV shows or whatever. But whenever I go through these crime bills or whatever, I rarely see anything about cybercrime in any big way. Are our governments approaching it? Is the Canadian government doing that?
Well, they are beginning to. Canada was skinned in the first decade of this century in terms of credit card fraud. The banks were hit very badly. I've had a long conversation with an active cyber criminal. He's still out there doing stuff, and he said, you know, Canada was one of the people we hit because the banks weren't that secure. It was easy to clone cards and then use them in ATMs. Also, they didn't come after us. Whereas if you go after American credit cards, the reach of the Secret Service and the FBI is very long around the world. So they avoided hitting the Americans, and they hit the Canadians a lot. Now, people are now realizing in governments around the world that they've got to do something about this. But one of the problems is you try and squash down an issue like cybercrime by bringing in draconian laws, And what you do is you get people agitated because you're encroaching on their civil liberties and their right to privacy. And this is where the genius of the internet, which is its interconnectedness and why it's such a wonderful, fantastic thing, is also its Achilles heel, because you solve one problem, or you try to solve one problem, and you create a problem elsewhere through legislation.
What should Canadians be most afraid of? Because there's people who think with cybercrime, how can they be victims now?
Well, at the moment, credit card fraud is okay. It's not, I mean, if you get done, the banks will compensate you. So we all pay for it. It's you know, ordinary people who pay for it because banks put up our charges to cover the cost of credit card.
So when the banks get robbed, the credit card companies get ripped off here, they have insurance policies and they'll just pass the savings on to you.
That's exactly it. What we really have to be afraid of, and although for a long time this was sort of fantasy stuff, is if there are any successful attacks on what we call the critical national infrastructure. That's power, that's telecoms, utilities, and so on. And this was in the realm of fantasy until last year, when we had the emergence of something called the Stuxnet virus, which people may well have heard of. Stuxnet was designed to attack uranium enrichment facilities in Iran, and it attacked the motors running the pumps that sent water around the facilities.
The machine.
It attacked the machine, and had it not been detected, you could have had a nuclear meltdown in those enrichment facilities. So that is one state deploying it.
Israel is what people are saying did it. That's the rumor.
People say Israel, but people say that Israel did it. People also say that the technology was developed in the United States and the Israelis nicked it. And some people say that the Chinese created it. I couldn't possibly comment. But the point is one state or another not only stood up and said, we have developed this technology, but we're prepared to deploy it and we're prepared to risk that kind of catastrophe. And as soon as that happened, countries around the world started developing what they call cyber offensive capabilities. And that frightens me.
That's the new battleground, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we now have a fifth military domain. We had land, air, sea, and space, and the United States last year created US Cyber Command, and everyone else is in the process of following. And this is the first ever man-made military domain. Now, that is weird stuff, but there are still issues with that. For example, I don't know if you saw, there was a story in Wired magazine, a very interesting story, how the drones which dropped bombs in northeastern Afghanistan and northwestern Pakistan, those drones have been infected by a so-called keylogger virus, which, you know, monitors everything that's being done. And the Department of Defense can't get rid of this virus. Every time they try and clean it, it keeps coming back. Now, what sort of confidence are we going to have, George, when our drones, we know they've got a virus and where are they going to drop their bombs?
Well, isn't part of when you read some of the comments pages on the stories of that, it's kind of as serious as the story is. It becomes comical. Some they're like, it's a PC-based system. Why?
Well, exactly. I mean, one of the interesting things, of course, now anything I say about this, I have to preface by saying I don't have any commercial interest in this. But of course, if you want, you know, what are Canadians worried about? They're worried about being infected on their PCs. The first thing that they can do to reduce that risk is stop using Windows-based systems and go over to Apple. Yeah. And that is because...
But don't all go over, because then the virus makers will come after Apple users.
I shouldn't really be saying that, because it means that, you know, because I've gone over to Apple, of course, because they don't bother to make viruses, very few viruses for Apple, because 90% of the world's computers are run on Windows. Right. And so those are the vulnerable ones. And what you're really doing with computer security as an individual is you're reducing your risk. Make sure that, you know, if someone wants to hit you, George, as well they might. Yes. If they decide to go for you or for me, there's nothing we can do about it.
Misha Glenny, the book is called Dark Market, Cyber Thieves, Cyber Cops, and You. It's great to see you, man.
Good to see you, George.
Thanks a lot. We'll be right back.